Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I am going to be filming for the first time in a couple of weeks. I've mentioned before that I'm travelling around Europe quite a lot and honestly I didn't really feel like filming. I just wanted to be present and not be, glued to my phone or my camera. So that's kind of the reason for why my videos have been less frequent, but we're back to filming now, which is great. And I'm looking forward to doing some reviews. I've got a lot of reviews coming out over the next couple of weeks, and I did get quite a bit of reading done, which is always nice. So without further ado, let's jump into two Speedy book reviews. First, we have Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. Of Mice and Men is a classic. It is a book that I read in school and I absolutely detested it. I've spoken about this before. I really hate the way that literature is taught in school. And I just did not like the way that they taught that book. But as an adult and as somebody who has rediscovered their passion for literature and classics, I loved it. Now, Of Mice and Men is a story about friendship. It's about two people who are trying to live a better life, and it's set in the backdrop of the Great Depression. Now, we are following a few characters, but we're following two main characters, George and Lenny. George is kind of like the ringleader, and Lenny is a bit of a brute from an external perspective, but he's actually a massive teddy bear, and we get this really interesting dynamic between these two characters. They go to a ranch for a new job, and we are essentially chronicling their journey as they participate in this new environment. Now, what did I like about this book? There's so many things to like about this book. First, it's very short. It's about 80 pages. Now, the fact that Steinbeck is able to pack such a well thought, developed story in such a short amount of time is incredible. I've read quite a lot of Steinbeck's works now, more of his longer stuff, and I loved every single one of his books that I've read. But Of Mice and Men is obviously the one that he's probably most well known for. And I think the way that the story develops is just really quite something. It's a very well thought out, well-rounded story that doesn't need more pages, even though I wouldn't hate it if it gave me more. The characters really make the story. We have George, who I mentioned is kind of like the older brother. He is the one who has more of a paternal instinct. He really looks out for Lenny. Lenny's very naive. He's a bit of a teddy bear, but he's really big in size, so a lot of people mistake him for being a bit of a brute, but he's not actually. He acts like a child. He's very immature and he needs a lot of help and support from George. And we notice that whenever George isn't around, Lenny suffers as a result of that. And unfortunately, that leads to some really horrible consequences later on in the book. Another character that I really enjoyed was Candy. A lot of characters in this story are discriminated against. Now, Candy is discriminated against because he is old and because of his disability. There's this one really tragic scene with his dog where something happens with his dog. And for me, it kind of acted like a bit of foreshadowing for the end of this book. If you don't know the end of this book, I don't know where you've been. If you've never even heard of this book, I don't know where you've been. So most people are probably going to know what I'm talking about. But Candy, for me, is he's kind of like an unintended consequence of extreme masculinity. I think he's one of those characters that you can definitely empathize with for that reason. Another character that I really liked seeing, and I kind of like a book just about him, is Crooks. Crooks is black and he represents the ever-present racism in 1930s America. He's very much a second-class citizen. He's got his own room whereas everybody else shares a room, and the way that they speak to him and the segregation that he faces is just astonishing. All the characters are lonely to an extent, even George and Lenny, but Crooks has it the worst because he is black. The discrimination that he faces is essentially on another level, and I really felt for him, but I can also understand in the context of the time that this was written why he is presented in that way, because that's the reality of the time that this book was written in. And I think it's very much at the forefront of the book. The last character that I'm going to mention is the only female character in this book, and that is Curly's wife. And Curly is the owner of the ranch, or he's the son of the owner of the ranch. And Curly's wife's name is not a name that we know. She is just called Curly's wife. And the way that she is presented as a philanderer, she's presented as somebody who just wants attention, who's not being honest to her marriage is very interesting, and I think it gives a really interesting commentary on the position of women and the role of women in society at that time. But I think Curly's wife is another unintended consequence of really, really extreme masculinity as well. And we see that manifest multiple times throughout the book. So the characters are very rich. They've all got their own distinct identities, even though we're not with them for that long. And I think each character, even the ones that I haven't mentioned, have very specific nuances to them that make them all interesting in their own ways. The last thing that I'm going to mention on this one, because I'm going over my 5-minute rule, is the themes. Now, obviously, there's themes of racism, there's themes of, you know, the role of women in society, there's themes of friendship and loyalty, there's themes of the American dream and capitalism. You know, one core part of this story is that George and Lenny look to a brighter future. They want a brighter future, but that brighter future unfortunately never comes. But the fact that they have this hope in the first place shows that capitalism is very much rampant and is very much a firmly held belief that if you dream and if you put your hours in and if you work hard, in theory you can also achieve the American dream, which, as we all know, can lead to some very differing outcomes depending on who you are and where you are and how much luck you have. The tone of this book is also very sad. It's not a light read. There's a lot of heavy stuff, and even though it's not necessarily always obvious, the tone of the writing is just really like melancholic. It's very depressing in some ways, but I think as you're reading it, you will get things from it that will help you put things into perspective, maybe in your own life, because obviously the world that we are shown in Of Mice and Men is very much an extreme, but there are many people who still live that type of life even today, and it's quite interesting to revisit it from a modern lens. I gave this book a 5 stars. Obviously, it was really good. I really enjoyed it, and I think everyone should read it. And I think if you have read it but you read it as a child, reread it now as an adult and see how your views differ from when you were younger. I'm going to read one quote because I originally had 3, but I've just realized this video is going way over. Here we go. A guy needs somebody to be near him. A guy goes nuts if he ain't got nobody. Don't make no difference who the guy is, long as he's with you. I tell you, a guy gets too lonely and he gets sick. All right, next. So the next book that I read was, well, I actually read this one before, Of Mice and Men, but the next book I'm going to review is The Price by Arthur Miller. Now, Arthur Miller is another American author who I read a few of his plays when I was younger, again, mainly for school, and I've kind of rediscovered his writing semi-recently, and so, you know, I bought a collection of his plays and stories, and I thought I would read The Price because I really like the premise of it. And it's really short as well. Again, it's about like 60-70 pages, so you can get through it in one sitting. And it's a 2-act play where we're following a man whose father has just died and he wants to sell the furniture from the family home. Basic premise. And we get really interesting interactions with his wife, who is very much present, Esther. And then we also get interactions with his brother, Walter, who comes in towards the end of the first act. This story is really about family. It's about family, it's about loyalty. It's also a little bit about the American dream. As you can see, there's some common themes here, but it's about the choices that one makes and the impact of those choices. And it's about regret, and it's about thinking about a life that could have been. If you like that type of work, I think both of these books are a really good choice, but I think I really like this one for that because we really get a closer insight into this brotherly friendship. And I love books about brothers and sisters because, you know, I have 2 older brothers and I'm very close with both of them. So I always like to read about those dynamics at play in books. Victor and Walter's relationship is fascinating. Victor is just your kind of average guy struggling to pay his bills, wants to live a better life, but unfortunately doesn't really have the means to. Walter is a surgeon, if I remember correctly, but he's done very well for himself. He's got a lot of money and he's conventionally successful. And there's this conflict between them because the life that Walter lives is a life that Victor also could have lived, but he made certain decisions that put him on a very different path. and we are now seeing the consequences of that in a conversation between the two of them. And it's really, really satisfying to listen to them speak about things. You know, there's anger, there's rage, there's this sense of loss, and there's just a lot of emotion, and I just think it's really wonderfully captured in the dialogue. The other character that I'll mention is Esther. So Esther, I mentioned earlier, she is Victor's wife, and again, you know, we kind of get the idea of what role women play. She is often told to be quiet. She's often kind of pushed to the side, not physically, but she's kind of, her opinion doesn't necessarily hold as much weight, and she wants a better life, but she knows that her husband can't necessarily give it. And so what ends up happening is that she sides with Walter quite a bit, and it causes more and more friction. So seeing these two players isolated is interesting enough, but then when you get Esther involved into that, it adds another layer of dimension to it that I really enjoyed. The other last character that we see is a guy called Gregory Solomon. Gregory Solomon is the person that Victor calls to buy the furniture, and he is Jewish, and he is a bit of a character. He's a bit bizarre, and we get an interesting insight into the role of a Jewish character at the time that this book was written. And he almost acts as like a bit of a buffer as well between Victor and Walter, because he kind of comes in at random points and just, I don't know, makes it feel a little bit awkward, but like in a very interesting way. The characterizations overall are done really well. Like, I connected with each character in one way or another. I connected with each character in different ways, and I think in a play that's quite hard to do, but he did a wonderful job of it. And I think if you're looking for just like a really short read where, you know, you just want to read about some like family dynamics with some really, really good dialogue, then I think this is a really good place for you to start. I gave this book a 5 stars as well. It was really, really good, and I'm definitely going to be reading more Arthur Miller as a result. Now for the quote. Was there any love here? When he needed her, she vomited, and when you needed him, he laughed. What was unbearable is not that it fell apart, is that there was never anything here. And there we go. Thanks for watching, folks. Let me know if you've read either of these books. I would love to discuss, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay safe, take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.